Have you ever inspected a property on a Saturday and you go, you get out of the car, you shake the agent's hand, you leave your details, you go for a wander through, then you get back in the car. And then later that day, you try and recall some of the things about that property and you go totally blank. If so, you are not alone, because people do that all over this country every weekend. And it's largely because we go into these properties with a bit of an emotional journey throughout, but it's really important that if we're going to part with a lot of money to buy this real estate, we need to have a bit of a method or a framework that we go through. And as a buyer's agent who sees scores and scores of property on a monthly basis, for me to differentiate and to remember on behalf of a client, it's important that I have that sort of mental checklist that we go through. And the first one is all about location. And a lot of this homework can be done in advance, because there's so much really good information that you can get on the internet. You can go to Google Earth and check things out, just to make sure that you have a good understanding of the particular location that you're going to look at. But nothing actually beats driving around yourself and having a bit of a look, because you want to observe the people, you want to observe the cars that people drive, because it gives you a hint as to the demographic of the area. You want to observe the smells in the area, because if it's too offensive, people won't want to be there, because it might be an indication there's a factory that's upwind that's bringing it down. So there's nothing that actually does replace that sort of looking around the suburb yourself. So I encourage you to drive around beforehand. But I also encourage you to go at different times of the day, because typically you're looking on a Saturday morning when everyone's home from school, home from work. But you do want to check it out during peak hour, and you also want to check it out during kids' school pickups and drop-offs, just to see if your street becomes a cut-through or a bit of a thoroughfare. So it's important to not just check it out on a Saturday morning. And equally, you need to have some familiarity around where the schools are, but also all of the lifestyle drivers that come for being in that area. Where am I going to get my latte? Where am I going to get my smashed avocado on gluten-free toast? Where are the cafes that I'm going to spend my time when I'm not working? But also, when I do go to work, how am I going to get there? Am I going to go public transport? Can I get to the train easy? Or do I need to catch a bus? Or do I need to catch a tram to get to the train station? All of these things are really, really important considerations. So when it comes to location, some of it can be done in advance, but it doesn't mean that you can't not do that when you get there. The second thing I do is when I get out of the car, I look at the street appeal, and I actually stand back from the property and I just have a look and get some context from that property compared to the others. Am I looking at a brick house when everything else is weatherboard? Or am I looking at a weatherboard when everything else is brick? I really want to get an understanding of what's up and down the street, so I can get an idea of where this one that I'm looking at fits into the overall picture of the suburb. And equally, I want to know, is there any street appeal at all? I mean, do I look at this property and it stands proud in the street, or is it on the low side of the street and you sort of have to look in, or you're actually on the high side of the street and you have to look up, or is it just on the flat? So there's lots and lots of things that you're trying to get a handle on in a short amount of time. What about the roof? Is it a terracotta roof where everything else is colour bond roof, or vice versa? So getting that context is really, really important. But the other thing to keep in mind is if you're planning on buying something and doing some renovations or some extensions to, have a look and see if any of the neighbours have actually done it before you. Are you looking at a property next to someone who's put an extension up and someone else down the street, which will give you a bit of an indication that the council is sympathetic to that type of thing? Or are you looking at a property where no one has got a second story addition and you're going to be a pioneer? Because therefore you're going to have to make sure that council will actually allow you to do that. And the other thing I think is really important is don't be afraid to knock on doors of the neighbours on either side of the open for inspection, because you would be surprised how much information you can get from spending that 10 or 15 minutes talking to the neighbours. Because you might find out that the reason they're selling is because down the road they're building 50 apartments. That's going to suddenly increase the density and there's going to be no parking in your street. Or equally, you might find out that that neighbour next door is actually planning on putting that extension on, and you are on the wrong side of that, and you're going to get some shadowing that will come into it. So you're going to spend $500,000, $1 million, $1.5 million on some real estate. Invest that 10 or 15 minutes talking to the neighbours. I can tell you from experience, I've got some of my best intel buying real estate from doing that very, very thing. So the other thing that we need to be thinking about is the construction of the particular property, because a lot of modern building is around a concrete slab and they put the frame up on the roof. But back in the old days, the properties that were built, they've usually had brick footings, they've got the timber floors, they've got the timber construction. And so we need to be thinking about stumping, we need to be thinking about if there's any subsidence. And the other thing we need to always be conscious of is older properties require more maintenance. And that's something that we actually have to plan for. But the beauty of the older properties are they have that period charm. So if you do go to the effort and your budget allows to restore them back to their original form, they can come up absolutely stunning. And from a capital growth perspective, that can pay very, very handsome dividends. So the next thing you want to do is, as you're walking through the property, you want to be checking out things like the floors and the walls, the quality of the paint, the roofing, all those sorts of things that you often don't really think about until later. In fact, on second inspections, the amount of times people have gone into properties and gone, I didn't actually realise that was there. It's because they weren't paying attention. So you want to have a look at the appliances. Are they older appliances? Are they in good working order? Or do they look like they've been replaced quite recently? Importantly, depending on which climate you're in, does it have the right heating and does it have the right cooling? And how old are those things? Are they likely to need more maintenance, or are they likely to be something that's put in just recently that won't require much maintenance at all? Have a look at the fixtures and fittings. What are the quality of those things? Will they need to be replaced, or are they fine as they are? And quite often you could sort of comment on the fact that it's really light and bright in a property, but not pay any attention to the fact that there's no window furnishings whatsoever. So when you move in, you're going to have to go and get those things in place, which is an additional cost. Don't be afraid to walk out the back, check out the quality of the fences, but also have a little peer over the fence to see who your neighbours are, because you don't know who's lurking over that back fence. So it's important to know who you're about to get into bed with, because you will be spending a bit of time in close proximity to your neighbours. And then the last thing I do is what I call the forgotten category, because no one really thinks about the plumbing or the electrical or the roof or the subfloor. Is there any water damage? All those sorts of things. So a little tip is to go and find where the shower is and actually have a look at the wall behind the shower to see if there's any leaking through the grouting that might need some maintenance, or show high moisture readings as well. So I always suggest that people get a building inspection done, absolutely, but you've got to spend some money on it. So it kind of makes sense for you to go and check these things out beforehand to give yourself a bit of an idea. Is the electrical board one of the new modern ones, or is it one of the old and sort of dated ones as well, which would indicate that the wiring hasn't actually been done? So there's a lot that you can do in the inspection, but the point is very simple, that you've only usually got a 30-minute window for these open for inspections. And so therefore, you've got to use your time very, very wisely. So that's what a BA does. A buyer's agent is trained to look at all of these things on behalf of the client that they're buying for, because they've been through so many properties that these things become commonplace. But for those people who aren't doing it on a regular basis, it's really important that they consider those things the next time they're looking to do a property inspection.